Welcome to the roller coaster of midlife. I'm your host, Lucy Q. Now, today we're going to switch gears a little bit because while we've extensively discussed the challenges that we face as midlife women and moms, we rarely look at it from the other side of the coin, the men who stand by us. Joining me today is Larry Bilotta, a name synonymous with understanding and navigating the stormy waters of midlife. Larry is a relationship and marriage maestro, an author, a speaker, and a leader of several transformative programs that have been the lifelines for countless couples teetering on the edge of separation. His acclaimed Environment Changer course and the Essential Marriage 101 have not only salvaged relationships, but also empowered individuals to reclaim their sanity and reshape their perspectives. Welcome, Larry.
Thank you for having me, Lucy.
So it's something I have been thinking about for a while because, as we talked about before I hit record, everything that I'm doing stems from my own, what I call my midlife meltdown. Because for me, the term midlife crisis is a bit icky feeling. And I really see that what I went through is everything sort of dissolved and I was able to create something new and different, a new version of things. But I've often wondered about how what women go through really affects our husbands, because while we may make it through the murky waters, not everything comes to light. And certainly it hasn't necessarily done in my own marriage. Women, so much comes at us at midlife, and hormones do not help things at all either. So I'm wondering if you can share just a little bit about who you are and how understanding this midlife crisis became so important to you.
So midlife crisis is something I didn't call it. I didn't have a name. So I was married for 40 years before my wife passed. And in that 40 years, I was married to a very, very strong woman. And I didn't know what that meant. I just knew she was angry. And why was she angry? Well, she was angry, and I later found out she was angry because she did what her parents did. She acted the way her parents acted. She saw situations the way they did. And so I didn't know that. So I came from a home with non-arguing parents, non-fighting parents. These are parents that just lived a very peaceful life. And her parents were very, very volatile, very willing to yell, to hit, to do all these things. So this is two completely different value systems. And these completely different value systems, I did not know anything about when I entered the marriage world. And so what I was doing is I was walking in, I should have known something when my father and mother were not willing to talk to her father and mother or even meet them. And her parents didn't even want to meet or even ask about my mother and father. They had a sense that we don't want to stay by those people. So that was the beginning of me going into this 40-year marriage. And so the midlife crisis happens when all the things that I want in marriage, that I think I want in marriage, start disappearing. And they start disappearing because what's replacing them? What's replacing them is me becoming my father, and or I should say, becoming my most dominant parent. So in most cases, men become their fathers. So if their father had a problem with temper and getting angry, he starts showing that. And when he starts showing that, he stops being the quote unquote loving guy he used to be. And so here's what's happening in the midlife crisis. He's opening the door to a midlife meltdown happening in her life because he doesn't know what's happening in his life. He's falling asleep. He's stepping into the subconscious messages of his father, and now he's becoming that behavior. So she starts to see that, and she starts saying, well, what is this? This is not what I bought. I didn't buy this guy. She's looking at his father, and the ways of his father is what she's looking at. And so she starts questioning her value, her importance, her, what if I do, haven't I dated enough, and all those questions that women do. And so she now gets shaken loose. she gets shaken loose because she's now looking at a why am I here question. And she starts seeing it over and over again. And while she's doing that, her subconscious is throwing up the messages she was given. And she was given messages of anger, a victim, worry, anxiety, whatever her messages were given by her mother, she starts having those hit her. And they hit her because remember, in your 20s, you are fully and completely yourself. You are fully alive, you are fully aware, you're fully awake. It's when you enter your 30s, you start to get weaker as a person, as a personality. And as you get weaker as a personality, the messages from your childhood, whatever they were, start coming up and getting stronger. And as they do start to become stronger and start urging you and pushing you, that's really where the midlife meltdown is happening. Because you were one way as a 20-year-old, 25-year-old, and when you enter your 30s, you start getting weaker as a personality. And that weakness, those subconscious messages get stronger. So while you're getting weaker, the subconscious messages are getting stronger. And at the same time, you're married. You got kids, you got a mortgage, you're cutting your grass, and you're doing all the normal things that people do in a life. And then secretly and privately, he's becoming his father. You're starting getting the messages of your mother and your father. And when those start meeting, if the gap between the two value systems of mom and dad are really different, really far away, that's when you discover it. So you might be 35 years old and it starts coming in, this clashing value system is happening. Well, a meltdown is very likely because this subconscious message system wasn't in your life in your 20s or even in your teens. You thought you were truly yourself, but now you're not truly yourself because the messages are screaming, you need to be this way. You need to value this or that or another thing. And books are written that name all these things. So I'm working on a book called This Is Not the Woman I Married. And it's a book for men, right? So in the book, I start to tell the guy who's facing this meltdown, what kind of things are you seeing? Well, she's less affectionate. She talks to you less. She stops texting as often as she used to. She stops calling as often as she used to. She becomes more critical and starts picking on you. She smiles less often. She looks at you less often. So all these things start happening. Why are they happening? Because you entered the marriage in your full early life state, where you were fully yourself and you said, I love you and I value you and all these things. Well, the ways of your mother are not like that. The ways of your mother are what she eventually became. And now those subconscious messages are getting stronger and they're getting louder and they're getting pestier. And now while you're starting to deal with that, he starts becoming his father. And as he starts becoming his father, and he doesn't know he's doing this, he's not aware, he's not willing to wake up, he's not even willing to read about any of this stuff. So all these ideas are new to a man. And so what he starts to see is what I described as the steps to the meltdown. And now the steps to the meltdown, look at I give it the phases. So there's a happy phase, there's a comfortable phase, there's a confused phase, a struggling phase, a miserable phase, a point of no return phase, a snapline phase, and a divorce phase. So when you look at, I've got 5 words in each. So happy is committed, conversation, safe, connected, and treasured. And doesn't that sound like love? Yeah, that does sound like love. And so that's where you start. And then you get to the next stage, which is comfortable. So comfortable includes committed, casual, comfortable, tolerant, and taken for granted. And then confused becomes committed, that's still there, misunderstood, selfish, 8th priority, and mixed signals. That starts happening. And then after that becomes the struggling world, which is angry, frustrated, blaming, resentment, plotting. And so that starts happening. And why are you doing that? You're doing that because the mother's and father's messages of your childhood are getting stronger. And this is not the best of your parents. This is the worst of your parents. And that's what's banging on your door saying, you've got to move this way. And that's why you're now in the struggling step. So then finally you enter the miserable step, which is attacking, defensive, bitter, tears, and distant. And this is really dramatic because now you know something's really wrong. And during the time that you think something's really wrong, you have times when you're happy. You have times when you're having aware that not only is something really wrong, but I need to get into other relationships. I need to get around other people. That's one of the reasons why women on their phone so much. Why are they on their phone so much? They're on their phone so much because I want to find the relationship that is going to take me out of this one because I'm in the miserable phase. So then we enter point of no return, which is avoiding, excluding, planning, justifying, and lawyer. Well, why is that there? That's there because I have to do something about this marriage I'm in, because everything is telling me something's really wrong about this marriage. And so when I get to the point of no return, I'm starting to really wonder, gosh, am I really in love with this guy, or did I make a mistake? And so that's what you're doing, the point of no return. And then when you hit the snap line, and some women hit the snap line and some women don't, then is convinced here, cold, done, closed, and disconnected. And this is where the snap line is. And the snap line is the place where you start to go, there is no man. There's no man here. He doesn't exist. And so you start doing that in your absolute move towards your whole childhood chaos. So what is the childhood chaos? The childhood chaos is now depending on what is the story of that first 10 years. So one of the women that I hear about from the men is what I call a black box childhood. A black box childhood is all that darkness of abandonment, abuse, and neglect is now stored in a black box. She doesn't even remember what happened. She doesn't remember her childhood. And so he doesn't know what her childhood really was. She didn't really talk about it during those happy years. And so he doesn't know. It's a black box childhood. And I'm asking him questions. What was her childhood like? What do you know? Do you have any stories for me? And he's going, oh, well, she didn't talk much about it. Well, why didn't she talk much about it? She didn't talk much about it because it was so painful. Why talk about something that was so painful? So it's a black box childhood. So that snap line, depending on how much black box you have, determines whether you had to hit that snap line. And now there is no man. The man you had, the history, all that's gone. It's all forgotten. It's all washed away. You don't have any fond memories of it. You're not, holding pictures. This is one of the reasons why the women in the midlife meltdown make the pictures go away. They make the wedding albums go away. They make all that disappear because the childhood messages from the subconscious are saying, this is completely unnecessary. You don't need any of this. The reason why they're on their phone is they're trying to find this new place of new relationships, new people, new ideas. They're all looking for this new stuff because they want to step away from that what's in them, in their subconscious. And so what it is, it's two people who are married because based on their 20s, that's why they married. And so now they're in their 30s, they're in their 40s, some are even in their 50s, and the midlife thing is happening. And now that it's happening, it's really a clash of the two family systems of these two people. So there's an internal family systems guy, Richard Schwartz, and he writes all about this. Because when we think about the psychology of the midlife meltdown, what is the psychology of the midlife meltdown? It's what's happened in your mind. That's what's here, what's happening in your mind.
Isn't, really from the woman's perspective, there's a lot more going on than that. Like I almost want to say it's multi-layered because yes, definitely. And I'm relating this back to my own story. Yes, I can understand the clash in the two families. There's a lot of boxes that I could mentally tick in my head as you were going through that. But then, especially as those of us that are moms, you get to that midlife point. And, the tipping point for me was our oldest was getting ready to go to university. So I was going through an identity crisis. I didn't realize it at the time, but because I had invested so much of myself into being wife and mom, and I saw that role changing very, very quickly, that led me to start to question, well, who am I beyond these roles of wife and mom? So we have the dynamics of what's going on in the marriage. We have the dynamics of the mom and her nurturing self changing, and how, let's call it, how her children may or may not need her. And then, just to top it all off, as if we're not having enough fun, then we have all of these hormone changes, which in themselves, even if the everything else is going fine, the hormone changes can wreak havoc on any situation.
Yes. So the reason I don't talk about the hormones very often is because men have heard hormones so often, they're really tired of the whole idea because they don't have a hormone
Well,
thing.
so are we. We're done.
So they don't want to bring it up that when hormones, that's like a comment. And so if a man hears oh, that's a hormone thing, it's a joke. The hormone thing is a joke. And so the actual hormone thing for a woman is not understandable by man. He can't comprehend it. So if you bring up hormones, he doesn't know what she's going through because she can't explain what she's going through, because that's a whole physical body chemical thing that he can't comprehend and isn't about to. So I don't bring it up very often, but it's alluded to. It's really hinted at that the whole hormone thing is a physical body thing that's happening to her.
And mental, it is a mental thing too.
Yeah, well, it becomes then a mental thing. So what is the whole psychology? It's all about the mind. And so when I talk to men about the idea of healing themselves, because what happens to her becomes the platform that he starts to learn about acceptance and about gratitude and about appreciation and about forgiveness. And so those are the steps that he's trying to even begin to understand, because that's all about what he's supposed to do. And so I'm here as the reminder of what he's got to do. And while he's doing that, his apparent visual for her is she's chaotic, she's angry, she's rebellious, she's frustrated, she's mean, she's unforgiving. So that's what his perception is. And so he sees her as a wild and crazy and mean and frustrated woman, just tearing her hair out. And so that's all he knows. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give him a sense that there's still a human being in there. And so in this, we have this phrase called a Freddy, and a Freddy is the symbol of the ego. And so in my course, Freddy is the ego, and Freddy is the nickname for the ego. So when he looks at her, he says, in her eyes, I could see her Freddy. I could see her Freddy in her eyes. Now that's the idea that it's not her anymore. It's
okay.
Now
So let's play devil advocate here, because I gotta go here. You're sort of naming off what a husband sees in a wife.
Yes.
She's angry, she's frustrated, she's this, she's that. So what are we seeing in our husbands?
Well, now we're talking about a completely different perspective, because what was he? When I end up seeing him at the beginning, he's all the things. I gave this a name. I call it a pinball. And when a guy is a pinball, he's reacting to everything in the outside world. He can't not react. He has to. And so because he's a pinball, and so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to go from pinball to environment changer. And so that's the road he's trying to travel. And so if he's looking at her, what does she see? She sees from a pinball perspective what she's got to react to. And so now what is he doing? Well, he's a pinball married to a pinball. And that's what it looks like at the beginning. And so until women get into your world and they start seeing themselves from this new constructive perspective, because what women are trying to do in your influence is they're trying to calm down and stabilize their mind and start seeing themselves from a better perspective, a more constructive perspective. Well, that's what he's doing in my world. He's trying to see her from that better perspective. That's why I mentioned the steps of acceptance. The first step is acceptance. And so what the statement is, I accept that, and he names her name, and she's rejecting me. I accept that she's rejecting me. And so that's his statement, the first acceptance statement. And the second statement is gratitude. I have gratitude that she is rejecting me because I learned from pain, and this is the pain that teaches me. So those are the first two statements that he starts saying in his mind. If he starts saying that in his mind, he starts moving away from being a pinball, a reactionary person, to being a person who changes the environment of his mind. And now he has a little chance to start moving towards a reasonable sense. So in your world, the women are trying to, and I want you to give that explanation. What is she attempting to do? And where is she moving? He's moving from pinball to environment changer. What are you moving to? Badass? What are you moving to?
Oh, well, I use the term, well, I basically say I'm going from hot mess to the badass I knew that I was.
Okay, so now so in a man's world, a badass is not what he wants his wife to be. He doesn't want her to be a badass, because a badass has all kinds of meanings he associates with meanness, cruelty, toughness, hardness,
Well, for me, for me, badass is, owning your authentic self, knowing who you are, and basically standing in your own truth.
Okay, so now that's
Not like a rebellious type of badass,
okay.
but it's just like, this is who I am. I own who I am.
All right, so if we go to own who you are, you're trying to get women to see their identities as their true identity. Because when you think about roles, people can become their roles.
Their
I can
labels,
become a
absolutely.
mother, right? I can become the mother of my son. I can become the mother of my daughter, and that's my identity. And so if I start to lose that identity when they go away to college, and they physically just make this big trip, and they go live in a different place, if I lost my identity, what replaces my identity if I'm not the mother of
Yeah.
this person's name? So how do you show women that move to a new identity?
How do
Like,
I show women?
yeah,
For
how do
me,
you?
it all comes down to your purpose, because for women, those of us that choose to have children, our purpose throughout that phase of our life is our children. We do pour everything that we have into our children. And when that identity shifts, we're lost. And as I explained to people, a lot of women, especially when you're talking about the Gen X woman, we went from being daughters to wives to mothers very quickly. So that sense of self never really existed. So now that we're sort of hitting the midlife point, we're now for the first time looking around going, well, wait a second, who am I? And it's a very destabilizing feeling to realize that, you've made it to your 40s and you have no concept of who you are. And then for me, and how I guide women, is that this is the time that you get to find out what your next purpose is. Find out who you really are, what dreams you have, and go and chase them. Because again, a lot of us are looking back to, I refer to this checklist that society has presented to us. You go to college, you get married, you buy a house, you have a car, the two kids, and then we're told that this checklist is supposed to make us happy.
That's right.
And then that everything's colliding where you're like, I checked all the boxes, I've done all of these things, and I'm not happy. So for me, it's encouraging women to turn inwards. Yeah, you know what? There's a hell of a lot of healing that has to go through, you have to go through in identifying your purpose. But once you start to connect with those inner passions and discover what your purpose is, and then you actually have the courage to go after it, that's when life changes.
Yes, I hear you talking about, you're representing women and going through that midlife thing. And here you are doing this podcast for 5 years. And I know what like an amazing sacrifice that is and how much work that is. but there's a passion in you about that whole idea about who you're helping. And so the men that I'm talking to, they are looking at the woman as, I want you to come back and value me. I want you to come back here and value me. And so the whole idea of a woman coming back is almost like, I can't come back and repeat my life with you because you're attached to all kinds of values that I don't even agree with anymore. And so when a man realizes that, he starts to realize he's got to reinvent himself while she's reinventing herself. Well, he doesn't have any idea what that reinvention in a woman's life is. He doesn't know what it is. He doesn't know how she's going to do it. And so what he looks at is things like, she's spending time with girlfriends who are divorced. That's a shock to his system. Like, what's he going to learn from them? Right?
Yeah.
Because he calls them bad influences, right? But what are women who are divorced? They are women who are leaving the husband that were giving her things that made her feel bad about herself. And so he represents all the feelings that made me feel bad about myself. And so he doesn't know how to call her back. He doesn't, that brings us to the collection of people who remarry, which is a really strange environment. It doesn't even happen every time. People who remarry, like, how does that happen? Well, they start to realize that I am comfortable with you because I'm comfortable with things that you still represent for me. And I think I'm kind of wandering back to where I was comfortable with you. And now the guy I come back to is not the same guy. And the reason he's not the same guy is he started realizing that I can't be my father anymore. And so he starts, if he starts changing the environment of his mind, he's going to start to see his whole world entirely differently. And when he's doing that, he's going to start to see her as a different person, a person who's got a different set of values. So she's not going into her mother and father for her value system. He's not going into his mother and father for their value system. And so now there's more chance that they can have freedom in this later stage in life. And that's really what you're going after, which just happens to be what I'm going after also, because there's more choices. And that's really what both people, because when you're influenced heavily by the value systems of your parents, because when you leave your 20s, you had your value system. You loved it, you liked it, you enjoyed it, and you were identified with it. But when you fell into your 40s, in your 30s, and you fell into this, I'm weaker now, and I'm being influenced by this value system of my mom and dad, I don't like that. I don't want that. I was talking to a guy who was married to a woman who was raised in an Asian culture, and she was actively throwing her Asian culture away, actively throwing her mother and father away, and actively divorcing her husband. She was actively doing it right now, even while she had a daughter. And so I'm working with her husband, and he's doing, he's like a very patient Malaysian guy, right? He's a very patient, kind Malaysian guy. He doesn't have any really malice in him or anything. And so he's got a very stable, very traditional father, and he's got all of that. And he's recognizing that she is throwing away her culture, her parents, and her husband at the same time, like she's rushing. And she's also an entrepreneur, by the way. So she's diving into business and she's throwing away these relationships. And it's like dramatic to see it. And it's dramatic to feel it. So he's this patient guy who's now slowing down, and she's moving to London and leaving Malaysia, and she's throwing away the country, she's throwing away the culture, throwing away her parents, and so all this, and then her husband finally. And so he's this patient guy who's become a lot more patient, a lot more understanding, a lot more willing to work around her and with her. And so that's like an ideal setting for a guy who's married to a woman like that, where she's actually throwing everything away to try and reinvent herself.
Well, and in my case, I'm still married. Yeah, we had a few rocky months, absolutely. But from my experience, as I healed myself and I realized my truths, my authenticity, and my purpose, my new purpose in my second chapter of life, um, I was able to better love my husband. I was able to be the person that he needed me to be because I was healing myself. And as I healed myself, he started to shine the light inwards and he did his own healing and we
So,
came
so
together.
you went through the transition. Did you see him become less of the way he was raised and more a freestanding who am I guy who could
Yeah.
answer that?
Yeah, we both did. We both realized that our upbringings were not in line with our true values. We
Okay.
raised our kids completely differently from how we were raised. And we're
Mhm.
still considered to be the sort of out there people in our families because we're living our lives for ourselves. We are not conforming to what society may or may not expect from us. So we're seen as the black sheep. I don't care. I am happy as fuck and I don't care. I don't care. And that's really been the beauty of our journey together is that yes, we and that's why I call it a midlife meltdown, is because we had to boil everything down to let the true essence of why we came together and what we're here to accomplish come to the surface. And then we're just building and building and building on that.
So when you look at your switch, your change, leaving the meltdown and actually being able to keep the relationship, this is something that makes men hopeful when they encounter women like you. I kept the relationship when they want to know, well, how did you do it? How did you not become so throwing away of everything and trying to invent this completely new life that doesn't include anything from your past? How did you see that transition from I'm throwing everything away or I'm leaving stuff and I'm going to include the guy who's and I'm going to assume he's changing. Talk a little bit about how you saw him changing while you were changing, because that like, whoa, how'd you do that?
Well, because we did, for better of lack of better term, we did somewhat separate for a very brief time. But we realized that we were meant to be together. We truly loved each other. And, we came together and we had two kids for a reason. There's a reason there. And that's still there. It will always be there. And we knew that we had something worth fighting for. And yes, we had to be vulnerable in a way that we've never been vulnerable. We had to, you talked about that black box. I had to open up my black box. A lot
Okay.
of it he already knew. He'd seen the dynamics of my family unfold over 3 decades. So he had a damn good idea. But some of the truths and some of it, how it actually affected me, I had to be vulnerable. I had to give him the space to be vulnerable.
So that means that you moved into more honesty than you had before with each other.
Honesty with each other and honesty with myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you said honesty with myself. How would you not be honest with yourself? How does that happen? What causes you to want to be
When you're
look at
trying to be
someone?
when you're trying to check all those boxes and be what people expect you to be, you're not being honest with yourself. You're not having the courage to stand up and say, this isn't who I am. This isn't what I believe. This doesn't align with me.
So Lucy, how much did your mother influence you with her value system? How much do you think it affected you? Because you talked about the separation of you from your family as
Yeah.
a person. How
How
much
do,
how much effect did it have on you?
well, tremendous negative effect. Yes.
Okay, all right. So you had you did it in my world, and I remember I'm not talking to the women that these men are married to that are in my program. I'm not talking to them, so I don't get to have their perspective. But every once in a while, one of them just kind of slips out, and she finally does what you did, and she reconnects with this husband who's this now environment changer, and now what's really at the heart of their reconnection? Just what you said. We really loved each other, And in those marriages, there are some marriages where they don't really love each other. They really didn't.
Absolutely. I've
I,
had friends go through divorces, and I'm like, yeah, you needed to do that.
yes, you needed to do that. So they really love each other. And so these two women who came back, and I had them come to an event where they were able to talk. And what they talked about is I didn't love myself at all. I hated myself. They talked about that.
Yes. Yeah.
So, and the reason they came back to the guy is because he really took away all his conditions and didn't hold them anymore. And so he was willing to accept her exactly as she was, and she could feel that. She could feel the acceptance that they gave her, that those guys gave her, of them, because there was two of them. And so they became much more willing to keep that love alive, because these guys now took away all the conditions that they used to keep, and all the temper and all the anger and all the things that the forgetfulness and all the things they were doing, because they were becoming their fathers. So now these guys are not becoming their fathers, and they're much more willing to literally be close to her, because that love is still there. And so they don't hold those old values. And that's really what you're saying. You're saying we didn't hold it. We separated for a short time, but what was that separation about? That's, that separation was like a symbol of, you know what? Let's take this whole old value system thing and let's throw it away. And that's kind of what you did. Is that kind of what you did during that separation?
Well, yeah. I mean, if I was to put a time frame on it, it was maybe 2 or 3 weeks, maybe.
Okay. All right.
But it, again, and it was in a sense, me saying, no, I matter, but I also needed to get my own shit together. I
Okay.
needed this, I needed the space. I needed the space away from, the everyday life,
Yes.
just so that I could start to work through things. And it was in that time frame. Well, we had already sort of come, we were sort of back together. We weren't sort of living in the same environment at that point in time, because it did involve moving to a different city. But it was in that time frame that I had my most profound change. And it came into a moment of what I call complete surrender. And that was the pivotal point in, if I was to put a date on the calendar, it was at that point, it was that day that my entire world changed, my entire inner world changed. And once that inner world changed, then the outer world changed as well.
So you had a change of mind and a change of heart. You experienced a change.
I'm actually going to say it was much deeper. It was more of a deep spiritual change.
Okay.
Which never existed before.
I always ask guys what their spiritual foundation is. And when he initially answers, he talks about his religious experience. And he says, I used to go to church,
Yeah, my husband was definitely a recovering Catholic.
Okay. So that's what they say. I used to go to church. And so then I threw that away. I don't do that anymore. And so I'm looking for something, just what you said. I'm looking for something deeper in him that says there's something in him spiritual that can actually create meaning for him and start to ground him in some kind of spiritual experience. And so some guys will talk about something that he remembers a long time ago and start to mean something to him. And so I'm trying to get him to anchor to that. And so you had that profound spiritual experience, so that your heart and mind were changed by the spiritual experience. And so that's what you're separating. And guys in my program would love a 2 to 3 week separation to have a change of mind and heart. But there's no way that we can control what happens spiritually to anybody.
No.
There's no way we can repeat it or even make a replicatable thing, because everything in the spiritual world is just so completely out of our control and unpredictable. because whatever really is the deepest need is going to happen to you when that deepest need is met.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we all have some version of that. So he has some version of that. She has some version of that. But what I've seen is the guys who actually can bring their marriages back together are the guys that are in a marriage with a woman who really has a deep love for him. If that deep love was there, something great is going to happen later on. And it's just a matter of how long that separation needs to be before she goes through that discovery and he goes through that discovery. And so we're kind of in the same business with different genders.
Definitely. Definitely. Larry, this has been a very in-depth conversation. We have covered so much ground. But just as we wrap up, I'm wondering if you have any final words of wisdom that you can share with our listeners.
So the most valuable thing that a woman can do is follow somebody like you who says there's a path. If you can find somebody who can say there's a path and you trust that person, because if they don't trust you, they won't follow you. So they have to follow you. But I'm saying, if you're in the whole meltdown thing, you've got to find somebody that you can trust that really has at their core a good intent for you. Their good intention is really at the core of what they're doing, and you trust them. And if you can find that person, Lucy, you can find that person, follow that person, because you need to follow somebody. What you don't want to do is wander around the internet looking for every idea that you can add to a big patchwork quilt of ideas and think that patchwork quilt of ideas is going to take you somewhere. But you want to find one person that you can trust and follow that person. And that's true. That's true of authors you really believe in, and getting more of them. And some people do that. And the people who do that, follow that one person, that one idea, they always do better than people who put patchwork quilts together.
Definitely. Definitely. That's great advice, Larry. Now, to connect with Larry, please check out our show notes. I will have all of the links in there. And my goal for the roller coaster of midlife is to empower women like you to thrive in this amazing chapter of our lives. So go on, embrace the adventure, and start rocking midlife like the badass that you are. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend, because our greatest power is in our community. And don't forget to visit my website, therollercoasterpodcast.com, and click on Start Here to get your free audio course, 3 Steps to Go from Hot Mess to Badass and Start Rocking Midlife. Thank you to my listeners for choosing to join us. And Larry, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Lucy. This has been great. Appreciate it.
And until next time, keep riding the roller coaster and embracing the midlife adventure.